Hello and welcome to TelecomTV. My name is Martyn Warwick. We're here at Mobile World Congress 2014 in Barcelona in Spain, and I'm talking with Pranav Mehta, who is the Senior Principal Engineer and Chief NFV Architect with Intel. Pranav, there's a huge emphasis last year throughout 2013 on SDN, Software Defined Networks, and NFV. The whole thing seems to be more real than it was a year ago. What's the difference been in that 12 months?
I think what we have seen over the last 12 months is that we have moved from what I would call a proof of concept phase to more trial phase in real networks. And what we are seeing with some of our partners is that they now have implemented some of these concepts in field trials, working with some of the service providers like Telefonica or China Mobile or SK Telecom, as you can see on the floors here. And that's the difference. Now people are moving beyond just a proof of concept to field trials, and hopefully by the end of the year or early next year, we will see commercialization.
Do you have any indication what the sort of the user trials, the user cases are like? What's coming back from them? What sort of experience are people having?
What we are seeing is, as you know, the NFV group has defined some of these use cases.
Indeed.
And at least from my perspective, what we are seeing is that some of the use cases are more, they lend themselves more readily to an NFV type use case than some of the others.
Sure.
So you have heard virtual EPC, the Evolved Packet Core, being one of those use cases. You see multiple demos of virtual EPC on MWC floor. And as people are implementing some of these field trials, what we are seeing is that scalability is one of the most important things that they are looking at. And that is where, from our perspective within Intel, what we want to make sure is that we understand some of the bottlenecks that we run into as we try to scale the performance of these applications like virtual EPC. How do we make sure that as people add more subscribers and more eNode Bs, and the underlying platform will allow them to scale in almost a linear fashion. And it is easier said than done. So that is where our focus is really going to be. We understand that without the ability to scale, this whole transformation will be impeded. And that's not something we would like to see.
When you're paying attention in this way to the user experience, you also talk, and I've heard this said about Intel several times, you look at what's called a solution level framework rather than a silicon level framework or anything like that. Now, what does that mean? Sounds like good marketing speak, but what does it mean?
Right, so traditionally people have equated Intel with the silicon, and we still are world's largest silicon manufacturer. However, what we have learned over the years is that we need to start delivering to a solution level rather than a silicon level. And it is driven mainly from this notion of user experience. In the client space, we started paying attention to the user experience, and we have then tried to translate that into what the underlying solution requires. And the solution is actually not even just one platform. It's a collection of platforms that come together to deliver that end user experience. Very similarly, in the infrastructure space, when you talk about a virtual EPC, it is not just one element. It is a collection of elements, as the NFV reference architecture would describe it as. It's an NFV infrastructure, which is a collection of nodes, along with a controller and an orchestrator who are really trying to translate the policies that a service provider is really trying to implement, and then working with the NFV infrastructure, all these elements come together and make sure that we can do these network function virtualization in a meaningful fashion where you can instantiate these functions on a common resource pool in a very flexible way. You can manage them, you can move them around, etc. But all this requires coordination among all these elements as a solution rather than just one individual piece.
What do you think then are the most critical basic components, the building blocks that will enable NFV?
If you have been reading the press, over the last several months, the management and the orchestration aspects have gotten a lot of attention. And one could argue that rightfully so, because those are the pieces that you have to have if you were to create this really flexible infrastructure. So I'm not at all denying that they need the necessary attention. However, from my perspective, the orchestrator and controller cannot really pull this off, this new paradigm off, without the NFV infrastructure component having the right capabilities to really allow such paradigm. So in my mind, NFV infrastructure and the plumbing that goes within that infrastructure are probably the most important components that we need to focus on as an industry over the next few months, because unless we bring a new paradigm shift on the infrastructure side, the controller and orchestrator will not be as successful.
How near are we to that happening?
As a building block supplier, we are first trying to make sure that as we learn from these use cases, we can ensure that our underlying hardware platform can deliver to these capabilities. But in my mind, there is another layer that we as an industry really need to collaborate on, which is the software framework that makes up this NFV infrastructure. I believe that we have an opportunity to really change how the telecom industry has worked over the years and really embrace the open source as a big time agenda for this NFV infrastructure software framework. And that is what we are really trying to rally more support around within the industry, because historically, telecommunication industry has really relied on standards, and once the standards are defined, then the industry moves.
Sure.
Well, as you know, the standards take a long time, and the whole idea behind network function virtualization is to get the infrastructure on what I would call the cloud time, rather than the traditional telco time.
Sure.
And open source has served the cloud industry very well to increase that pace of innovation. And I think that is what we need to do in the NFV space, and embrace open source as a key component of the overall paradigm, and still allow other people to differentiate and add their value. But there needs to be this common pool that everybody can tap into and contribute to, which will accelerate the pace for NFV.
You mentioned a few times there the word collaboration. Now we know that SDN, NFV, and to some extent cloud have been driven by the service providers, the CSPs, the apps providers and so on,
Right.
rather than the manufacturers themselves in this particular case.
Right.
So the model has been turned on its head. It also means that collaboration between erstwhile enemies, or at least not best friends, is now the order of the day. Is that difficult to achieve, or is it a matter of necessity?
I think it is both. It is a matter of necessity. So I'm very hopeful that we will be able to get everybody into this collaborative space.
Yeah.
However, it is not that easy to achieve either.
No.
It is difficult to achieve. What we have to create as an industry is what I call a win-win-win strategy, where the building block suppliers like Intel are able to succeed. Obviously, the service providers have to be successful because they are the end users. But in the middle, what I call the system integrators, they have to be successful either if we were to really create an ecosystem that is thriving. So this win-win-win has to be the mantra for the whole industry. I am very optimistic that we can achieve that, but some paradigms will have to change. People will have to think differently. And as I said, open source, which traditionally people always thought as non-differentiating type of paradigm, we have to change that and say, open source is a way for us to quickly try new concepts and try new ideas and learn from that. It still leaves enough differentiation for people to add on top of, but at least there is a common base that we can create that will allow people to move faster. And service providers are embracing that concept very, very anxiously.
We are living in interesting times, are we not? Pranav Mehta, thank you very much indeed.
You are very welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.